Welcome to the first lesson of what's new in Swift 4. Today you will learn how to prevent others from messing around with your codebase. Welcome to the very first lesson of Chapter 9, What's New in Swift 4. Today let's talk about access control. So here's a problem statement. I don't want you to touch my code. Alright, here's a problem statement. Okay, I don't want you to touch my code. So why is it important that you don't touch my code? Okay, well, the first one is reduce indexing compilation time while building an app. Well, I'm gonna come back to this part later when we're really talking about the coding aspect, but not now. All right, this may not make sense right now. The second one is Apple engineers do not want developers to touch their code. It doesn't really have to be Apple engineers. Whoever created that API may not want the developer, the user, to touch their code sometimes, right? Imagine we're like 5-year-old baby, right? And the Apple engineer is like a father who created the platform. The father may give a computer to the baby, but the father may not want the baby to start customizing, playing with spoons, which I did when I was younger, so I broke the computer. So my father, the dad, does not really want us, the users, because relative to how much we know about this platform, they are the creator. They know way more than we do, definitely, right? They're the engineers. We are developer. We are users. That's why sometimes they don't want us to mess around with their system code. And also, lastly, no need to overwhelm your teammates with unnecessary methods. What access control allows you to do is, in fact, when you're using certain classes as a user, you don't see every methods, every functionality out there that is along with that specific class. So for example, when you use UIKit, you're probably not going to see every single method and functionality that's available by us, right? Apple engineers may have the access when they have access to the library. Yes, they may have access, but we, developers, the users, do not see all their methods available. So we're going to talk about how we do that. And then last, we're going to come back to this reduced indexing compilation time while building an app, okay? So as I mentioned a couple times throughout the entire course, we talked about a couple stuff. There are 5 types ways to protect your code. The first one is private. We talked about it private before. When we're talking about singleton, there's a file private. It kind of makes sense, file private. It's only available within the file internal. All right, I'm going to come back to this. Public and open. So this is the least secure. That means the user can do anything with this open. We're going to come back to it more specifically, and let's begin with a couple stuff. Let's begin with the private and file private. Okay. So here we go. We have I think you already know what private is. We talked about a singleton pattern. Private, that means you can only work within that specific scope, right? So this is a scope. This is a brackets, right? So for example, I have a game here. Private number equals 10. We have a score, and it's only gettable. So increase number by 1, number plus equals 1, and then you can get the score value. Okay. The reason we do this way, the reason we design this way, is that you don't want people to fiddle or play around with. You want to protect your internal code. You don't want hackers to come up and try to do something like this. Numbers 10. You don't want them to do that. That's why you want to only make score gettable. Only want to access a score. However, the score is only gettable based on number. So that's why you call this private here. So no one can really play around with number, this variable within the game class. This is really protecting your code base. So no hackers can play around with it. This is very, very important. This design, so if the user doesn't really have to change anything, you have to use gettable property. If not, you are zipperizing your entire code base. It becomes less secure. I've got hacked before in my lifetime, so I understand how important it is to make secure code. Okay. So again, we talked about this in the last time using singleton, right? We have account manager. We have static let, which is an instance that exists everywhere, like I am. Account manager. I think you get the point. The private init allows you to do is that you can only initialize this account manager object within this scope, which is refers to from here to here. Okay, that's it. Okay, so again, this is also protecting your code, because if you don't have init method, what's happening, you can create multiple account manager all around the world, because if you get rid of it, right, that means you can literally make account manager and then make an object like that. You don't want to do that. Singleton pattern is that only one thing exists one at a time, so you want to have a private init within here only. Okay, that's the whole purpose of using singleton. This is how you protect your code. Okay, all good. Life should be good. What are you complaining about? Oh, here. Okay. So, however, okay, so I'm going to talk about what's a little different in private extension. So, let's say we have a class called myStatus, and then we have a private var is happy. So, in the past, if you were to use Swift 3 or Swift 2, if you do extension myStatus, okay, you are not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to use this property within here, because as you can tell, private means it's only available within this scope. But in Swift 4, right, this is now it works. It's possible. So what happens is now you can just use the is happy. You have access to the is happy. In the past, you weren't able to do that. All right. Well, I'm gonna come back to why this has been changed. I'm gonna come back to this when we talk about file private. Okay. Cool. Okay, but let's talk about this part. When you're writing something like this is actually it violates the drive principle. We can make it a little shorter than it has to be. Right now we create two variables. One is called number, one is score, but we can make it a little more simpler. Okay, we call this private setter, means it can be only set within that scope. So for example, let's say you have a human and game. And let's say we have an init method right here. Okay, so here we have a human and then private set. All right, the only thing you've done is here set this bracket here. Okay, that's on that thing. And then a name, and then init this, right? Enter the value, and you initialize it within here. So what's happening is you are only able to initialize or change the value of name within the scope of human. Okay. Well, yeah, when you call it human method, what's happening is when you enter Bob, what's happening is you're entering the value, and then the name equals enter name. It's happening within the scope of this class definition. Okay, so this is identical. Let's say new game design, new game. Let's say score. Okay, and then we have let's call this 10. Let's call this score. Oops. Self.score. Okay, in the function, let's go above here. Okay. Alright, this is exactly identical as above here. But instead of creating this private var as well as making gettable here, you can only do it one at a time. You can just simply call it this way, and of course you have to initialize the value like that, and then that's it. This is how you do it. Score. Let's call this score. Yeah, so this is identical as this part. So if you're making any code, I recommend you to use this method at all. Okay, over this way. This is more concise. Okay, cool. So here we go. So we covered the playground part. There's a little more to talk about, which is file private, internal, and public, and open. We talked about private. We talked about every single case about private. So in order to talk about the rest, we're gonna use Xcode project rather than Xcode the file itself. Go to Xcode, create a new single view app, call it access control with Bob. Okay, replace it because I've already made it before, And then what's gonna happen is you're gonna simply copy. You can also, by the way, you can also run, just copy paste the playground page if you want to. You could do that, but you don't have to. So right now, we've covered so far. We've covered the basics of private as well as private as well as private set. So let's talk about file private. Well, the word file private should come across quite intuitive, right? So yeah, that means it's only available within the files. But just to show you guys, create a Playground Swift file. Call it just call it new view controller. If you're not familiar with, again, this course requires you to know, have experience with iOS development about 3 months, at least 3 months. So hopefully you guys are familiar with this platform here. If not, well, you're not in the right course. Okay, so all we're gonna do is here, let's call it file private, and then class new view controller, and it confirms the UI view controller, right? Controller, whoops, not input, UI view controller. Okay, and then we have video load, super video load. If you want to know more about what super video load does, you can come back to the next course. So here we go. So we created a class called new view controller, and then we call this file private, right? So let's go back to view controller and let's try to initialize that. What do you call it? Let's call it new VC. And then you try to do new view controller. Oh, but what's happening here? It's not showing up at all, right? It's not showing up. Why is that so? Well, it's because you've seen it before. Oops. What's happening? Could not be saved. Save anyway. All right. So what's happening? You call this file private. File private means it's only available, that method that it doesn't matter the method property. It's only available within this class. Okay. Within this file. So that means you can create new. Oh, I call it new view controller. you can make a new view controller right here. Okay, that's all good. It's semicolon lad VC, but you're not allowed to create a new view controller outside of this file. Okay, that's what it means by a file private. So let's come back here. So in order to use extension in the past, what happened was, let's come back to the file private extension. In the past, what happened was you could not call this private. In the past, you call it file private in front of every single variable. So if you want to use extension, what happens? You call it file private. It's kind of become repetitive. But now you can call it private, and you can still use it. And it doesn't really have to be extension. Doesn't really have to be within the same file. It could be used out. Extension can be used in different files as well, as long as it has a pointer to my status class or struct and enums. Okay, that's why they come up with a private new extension. Okay, so we covered the file private now. Let's talk about let's go back to the playground. Let's talk about let's see, internal. So let's talk about internal. Well, internal is actually so anytime you don't see any keyword in front of it. So right now this is normal class, right? It is implied that this is internal, right? This is internal. This exists everywhere. This is like a default access control that happens to every single thing that you define on your own. Doesn't matter. It could be method, it could be class, it could be enum. Doesn't really matter. So everything is internal if you don't specify anything here. So super video load is internal here. Let's see. So everything else is internal, literally. So what is internal? What does internal do? Well, internal allows you to. So what internal allows you to do is internal allows you to subclass it. Internal allows you to use it within the same module. So what is module in the first place? Well, module is like UI kit. This is one module. UI kit is like a one module. It's like a one package of code. So in this case, access control with Bob, this one is also considered as one module. So when you download open source project, any project, when you use library, you're literally downloading one module, one library at a time. So that's what module means. So UIKit, as you can tell, is nothing more than just a bunch of library. Just like access control with Baptist project, you're importing this UIKit right here. So that's one module. So what internal allows you to do is you can use any classes, structured enums within that same module. Okay. Okay, cool. So now we talked about internal. Now let's talk about public and open, which can be a little trickier than the rest. Let's create a new playground, a new Swift file called, let's call it open public. That Swift doesn't really matter. I don't really care about the naming at this point. So let's create, here we go. So let's begin with open now. So I'm gonna create a class called Bobby View Controller, okay? And then, oops, yeah, because I'm now importing UIKit and Bobby View Controller. And then here we go, we have video load. But if you think about video load is actually a method that comes along with UI View Controller, right? Well, let's take a look at UI View Controller now. Go to jump to definition, okay? And then if you take a look at their code, you see this is open class, UI View Controller. It confirms a bunch of probably protocols or classes. But it is actually open class. So what does open class allow you to do is you can override it. So the UI View Controller is coming from different module, right? It's coming from different planet. But when it says open, you are literally able to subclass it. You can override it. You can customize on your own. The same thing applies to video load. If you go to jump to definition here, if you see this open function, that means you can actually override it. You can customize it. Because you can tell, because right now we're using override func. You're allowed to do that. Okay. So here we go, we have an example. Let's say we have an open library, just assuming there's a library you're importing right now. And within this library, there's a function called function A, okay? And then if you try to, and also there's a function called open function B. So for open function, you can override function B, okay? Because this is open, but you cannot override A. So if it's public, yeah, you can use that thing. You can use that method. You can use that. Classes and whatever. However, when it comes to public, you cannot override it. That's it. But when it comes to open, you can override it. You can modify them if you want to. Okay, so that's what I mean by use opens. So when you use internal, however, when you have internal, let's say func C, when you have internal function, and then here, and then when you try to get like let's say random library, create an object, and C, it doesn't work. If it's internal, what's happening is it's only available within that module. Even if you import it, you have no access to this C function. If it's internal, it's only available within that module, within that random library from GitHub module. Okay, that's what internal means. Am I making sense right now? All good? Can I see the thumbs up? Hopefully thumbs up. You guys don't have to memorize anything. I organized everything in the lecture notes as well as written an article about this, so make sure to refer to them if you need to. So learning about access control is so important, learning about this, because you want to protect your code. You don't want to overwhelm. Let's go back to the here. Let's go back to the, what was it? The here. You don't want someone else to, especially when you're playing a game, when you're designing a game, you don't want hackers to modify your code. You want to protect it. And also you don't want to overwhelm your teammates with unnecessary method. You want to set things, a lot of internal method if that's not really used by the user, so that they don't really see those internal methods that are not used, such as you can just call it internal by default. And lastly, let's talk about reduced indexing compilation time while building an app. So here's why it's important that you define access control pretty much for every single variable. So let's say you have a view controller here, and then you have property, let's call it var name. So if you just simply call it var name, right? When you compile, what's happening is every single file is trying to see whether the name exists or not. But when you call it private now, when you call it private now, what's happening is Swift is able to say, okay, this function is only, this method or function or class is only available within that specific scope. So they don't really have to check whether this method or function exists in every other places. So it becomes such a short check rather than, hey, does it exist from this file, this file, this file? No, it's just one single check, done. So it's important that to specify the private file private. It's important that because it allows you to compile much faster. I don't exactly know how faster it is, but you definitely want to optimize as much as you can so that your compiler doesn't have to go through entire file. So that's it. That's why we use. Hopefully you understand why access control is important. You make sure to use them. In the next course, I'm gonna be very, very thorough with access control because I don't want to write cheap code. I want to write quality code that really can be it's very good. I just want to write good code and something that doesn't really break that often and somebody cannot hack, because I've been hacked before. It sucks to get hacked. Okay, all good. See you guys in the next lesson. It was it was a long lesson, but it was important for me to go over my thought process and the reasoning why it's important. See you in the next lesson, and take care. In this lesson, you've learned the 5 levels of access control in Swift 4. There are a couple benefits talked about it. First, it reduces the compilation as well as indexing time. Second, your teammates are not overwhelmed. Third, it prevents your code from getting messed up. In other words, you feel nice and safe. Access control in Swift is a fundamental way developers at Apple prevent us from messing around with their code base. Let us follow the same principle with our own API. Keep it simple and stupid. See you in the next lesson.